Hello, it's Philip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. I'm looking today at a book which has come to us from Bloomsbury Professional, and I have actually reviewed this in previous editions over the years. This particular edition my wife Elizabeth actually reviewed, and we had a long discussion about it, and I'm doing the presentation. It's Beswick and Wine, Buying and Selling Private Companies and Businesses. As I say, it's now in an 11th edition, and it's been written and really substantially updated by Susan Singleton. And we've given the title of our book review the following: Involved in Private Company Mergers and Acquisitions? Check out the new 11th edition of this authoritative text. And that's exactly what you're getting here. Let's have a look at the book first of all. It's a paperback, you can see it there, standard paperback. You've got ladders, which is quite interesting as a sort of depiction of where we are. That is actually the spine of the book. And then there's a bit of blurb on the back, which you can probably see. Then if I can point out at the bottom there's a link to an online service as well. Bloomsbury are moving forward very much with the online stuff, and I think it's very helpful. There's also some information about a licensing agreement at the back of the book, and then what you have got is there's some downloadable precedents as well which you've got, and then you've got the index. Now you can see that these law books are changing slightly now as we move into the 21st century proper, because obviously this link with the internet is extremely helpful. The books themselves, because I'm an old person, I actually like to have the book, but I do like to have the link with the internet, so that the precedents themselves are extremely helpful, which are a link there, and that links in with the bottom bit there, if you can see it, just to make it a bit easier for you. The index itself, just to move to that, is by paragraph numbering, as you can see. It's not a particularly big index, but it's very useful. It references it to paragraph numbers and precedents. There we go, you can see that. Then you've got some various precedents listed at the back of the book. And in fact, the book itself, let's go to the front of it. There's the actual front cover there. And another one with Susan Singleton. She's a solicitor, an experienced lady. There's the blurb about the book. Then you can see the contents itself. Quite a lot of contents there. Part 1 is the seller's perspective. Part 2, the purchaser's perspective. Part 3, the acquisition agreement. Part 4, post-completion. And Part 5, special situations. Total of 18 chapters. And Part 6, which is, I've separated out, is precedents. And there are 10, 11, 12, about 13 precedents in total, then the index. Do read the preface. It's always a good idea to read a preface of a book to get some idea of what's actually in it. The law is as stated at the 1st of June 2022, and as I say, Susan has produced, I think, a detailed set of points as to what is actually in the new edition. She's also asking and suggesting that if you have any suggestions and comments, please contact her. I think that's a good move forward, because it's happening now with a number of legal publishers where they're looking for the practitioners to say, well, you're using the book, what do you want to change? How do you want it to be changed? We're doing that with a number of books at the moment, and this is one of them. Then you've got a dedication, and I want to just show that to you. It's quite a detailed dedication there. Can I just say that Elizabeth and I do not review books which we don't like. It's only a book we do like. We review it, and I do point out that a lot of work goes into it, so the dedications are important. You can see this is to relatives, if I can put it that way. Then there's a detail about the author, Susan Singleton, and then about her fellow solicitors. Then you've got a nice little set of abbreviations, always helpful. Companies Act is anything to do with company law. I have found it is useful to have abbreviations because, like everything, especially in tax, it gets complicated quite quickly. Then you've got the table of statutes, and then after the table of statutes, statutory instruments. Then after statutory instruments, EC material. Now, for those of you with the Brexit bent, move away, because there's always going to be a link for some years to come with the European community or European law, whatever you want to call it. There is obviously a huge overlap, and frankly I think a lot of it will stay. I hope it does, personally, because we work very hard to try to harmonise our legal systems. Brexit, of course, has caused some problems with that, but alas, that's what happened, and we move forward. Now, the table of cases is listed there, a lot of cases, of course. What I liked about company law when I studied it rather a long time ago now, is that there's a lot of actually very interesting case law. Very interesting, because it's got personalities, it's got people, it's a bit like tort. There's a lot of personal stories in it, which I find quite interesting. Makes life more interesting than the very boring stuff, although even trusts, which is actually considered quite boring to some landlord, has its wonderful stories as well. Now here's the book, Chapter 1, an overview of the sale process. Remember, we're talking about buying and selling private companies and businesses, and it shows you the various steps going up. And you've then, after that, you see how the book is structured. It's got the paragraph numbering, nice lot of subheads as well, very helpful. I don't actually see any footnotes. There are no footnotes, so that makes life a bit easier. And then you go on. What you do have is a little mini index for each chapter, which I think is also helpful. And then right at the back, you've got the various precedents starting. As I say, it starts with part 6, the precedents. Then what you've got there is the first one is confidentiality letter, and you can download these, and these are extremely useful because it saves a lot of time trying to get things done. Just think about how wonderful it is now to have the computer systems, because in the past it all had to be typed up, very, very long, very labour intensive. Now, what do we say about this book? Well, in the past, I've always thought this is an interesting area, because buying and selling companies has always been, it's got some problems, obviously, to get with it, but it's about contract, it's about a whole range of different aspects of law all coming together. And so what we say is this: as its author Susan Singleton explains, the new edition of Beswick and Wine is, quote, primarily designed for solicitors, accountants and corporate financiers involved in private company mergers and acquisitions. And she adds that it provides a step-by-step guide to the sales and purchase process and the key commercial, tax and legal issues arising from it. Now you can see, therefore, there's quite a lot of law involved in this. It's not just a question of the structure of the company, it's about the legal problems and the tax position. So it's aimed, in effect, at all practitioners dealing with private companies and businesses. And it's no wonder that this long-established work, which is what it now is a very good reference material. It's been brought out now in its latest edition, which is the 11th, no less, from publishers Bloomsbury Professional, and I thank Bloomsbury for taking this publishing on. Primarily, and most importantly, the book presents a logically organised and detailed viewpoint which focuses first on the seller's perspective in part 1 and the purchaser's perspective in part 2, which of course is the crux of the book, if you like. Both the buying, therefore, and the selling processes are presented in a logical 6-step order, and they consist of the following: assessment, preparation, marketing, negotiation, and finally agreement. Now, as numerous tangled pathways towards the nirvana of agreement can be more than a little difficult to navigate, including the attendant legal implications which can arise, of course, the authoritative guidance this book gives us should prove invaluable, I think, and certainly gives time-saving help for busy practitioners, and I think the precedents availability is also very helpful. Now, the author is very careful to stress that the subject matter of this text applies specifically to private companies, pointing out that there are important additional rules applicable to the sales of public companies which are not addressed in this book. Now, as I say, it is about private companies, and obviously that's a separate area. Also, I think it should be stressed that the fact that although mergers and acquisitions activity has continued despite the coronavirus pandemic between 2020 and 2022, the bread and butter work of M&A as a lawyer continues to be in relation to legal due diligence, which is of course very much like all these sort of safeguarding things, very much to the fore at the moment. I mean, they're not really been that way in the past in some ways, but there's an emphasis now and an onus now which wasn't there some 50 years ago when I first started law. In fact, more than that. Now, the drafting and negotiation, which is advice which is offered, and the share of asset sale agreements and ancillary documents are actually very useful things to look at within the book, because it's actually going to be the core of the book for many people. And in all of this, of course, the book certainly excels, and that's one of the reasons why it's so popular, I think. And it's small wonder that the author has been responsible for the 4 previous editions, and she's continued a distinguished publishing pedigree dating from around 1979, when the early editions were written solely by Humphrey Wine, with later editions edited by Simon Beswick. And as you can see, the time has passed since that particular period, which is some over 40 odd years ago, of course. Now, in this time of post-COVID and post-Brexit, both twin evils which we've had to face, depending on your point of view, this new 11th edition incorporates important changes in the law and applicable regulations, which is how they're called, since the last edition. And as you would expect, there is detailed coverage of the case law. Now, it's not as big as you would think, and you can breathe a sigh of relief. Remember some of the very substantial indexes on cases in some of your company law books. That has been thinned out, I think, a bit. And it's also important to note the tables of statutory instruments, and of course the cases, and the EC materials, which I mentioned. There are also 15 pages of downloadable precedents, which is contained in part 6, which of course are accessible online. The details are at the back of the book, and you've got a password which is provided. Now, the author reminds us that, quote, most acquisitions in the United Kingdom are not of public companies. And it's an excellent reason, therefore, why practitioners embroiled in the sale and purchase of private companies and businesses should, in our view, acquire this latest edition of what is a highly regarded book. The law is stated as at the 1st of June 2022, and the book appeared, I think, round about the same time. In fact, I'm looking at my what I've got. I think the book came out actually in July 2022, and I'm recording this in the later summer. So thank you very much to Susan Singleton and to Bloomsbury for an excellent book. One quite last look at it. There it is. There's the front, the spine, and then the back. Just opening it in the middle. Here we go. Just what you don't want to see, I'm sure, when you're listening to this review. VAT. So you can see here, classic example. There's the paragraph numbering. You've got value-added tax. You've got a lot of detail. You've got quite a lot of information. In fact, what I would say is it's not too heavy, but it's heavy enough, the information, to give you what you want. And this, of course, is dealing with HMRC guidance. And again, it deals with a whole range of very important things concerning the business transfer agreement itself, which is an important document. Then it goes on to deal with completion. But I mention that because tax, I think, is an important aspect of our lives these days. We live to be ruled by accountants to some extent, and I'm afraid that's the way it is. Anyway, big thank you to everybody, and enjoy reading the book. Beswick and Wine is a classic today, and I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity to review it. Good luck. Bye-bye.